You're 23 years old, standing on a strip of black sand called Iwo Jima. Your boots are gone. Your feet are bleeding. In your hands is a machine gun ripped off a crashed airplane, a weapon the Marines never officially issued and some officers tried to keep off the beach. You've already crossed this killing ground 8 times, each trip dragging a wounded Marine back to safety. And you're about to do it again. This is the story of Corporal Tony Stein, the toolmaker from Ohio who walked into one of the deadliest battles of World War II with a homemade machine gun called the Stinger, and changed the fate of the men around him. You're watching War Era Records. If you care about real stories from real people in war, not just movie myths, take a second right now. Like this video, subscribe to War Era Records, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story we pull out of the archives. Now, let's go back to where this started, long before the black sands of Iwo Jima. 1. The toolmaker from Dayton. Anthony Michael Tony Stein grew up in Dayton, Ohio. His parents had come to the United States from Eastern Europe, German-speaking immigrants who left rising anti-Semitism behind and looked for something better in America. Tony wasn't the kid who sat quietly in the front row at school. He dropped out of high school to help his family and went to work. First at Patterson Field in a machine shop. Then as a tool and die maker in Dayton. He learned how metal behaves under stress, how to make parts fit, how to fix things nobody else could fix. He didn't know it yet, but those skills would matter more than any textbook when the war came. When the Marine Corps opened up parachute units, the elite Paramarines, Tony signed up in 1942. If there was a dangerous job, he wanted it. He fought in the Pacific on Vella La Vella and Bougainville, where fellow Marines remembered him calmly shooting multiple Japanese snipers in a single day. But what stuck in people's minds wasn't just his marksmanship. It was this quiet fact. If Tony's gear broke, Tony didn't complain. He modified it. 2. A plain gun becomes the Stinger. In the chaos of the Pacific, crashed aircraft were everywhere. On Bougainville, Marines started scavenging weapons off wrecked planes. One of those weapons was the .30 caliber and /M2 Browning aircraft machine gun, the same basic family as the Browning M1919, but lighter and way faster. It was built to sit in the wing of a plane and spit out up to 200+ rounds per minute, fed by belts of .30-06. Great for a tail gunner at 300 miles per hour. Not so great for a guy on foot. The aircraft gun had no shoulder stock, no normal trigger, no infantry sights. And it overheated like crazy on the ground, because it was designed to be cooled by the wind in flight. Most people looked at it and saw a problem. 2 Marines saw a blueprint. Sergeant Milan Mel Grevich and PFC John Little began experimenting with turning that aircraft gun into a weapon a single Marine could carry. They added a bipod, a way to shoulder it, and controls a human hand could actually use. The result was a strange, brutal hybrid, part airplane gun, part infantry machine gun. Later it would get a name. The Stinger. By late 1944, the Paramarines were disbanded. Grevich and Tony Stein both ended up in the 28th Marines, 5th Marine Division, training for an unnamed operation everyone knew would be hell, the invasion of a small volcanic island called Iwo Jima. Grevich had an idea but needed a machinist who could take it from weird prototype to real weapon. He found Tony. At a base in Hawaii, Tony and Grevich worked nights in a maintenance shed. They cut down a wooden M1 Garand stock and hollowed it so the aircraft gun's buffer could slide inside. Adapted the firing system so it could be controlled by a trigger instead of aircraft solenoids. Stuck a bar bipod on the front. And added sights so a Marine could aim while moving. The finished gun weighed around 25 pounds, fed from 100-round belts, and fired 3 times faster than a standard Browning infantry gun. When Tony test-fired it on the range, the burst was so fast that the target at 200 yards looked like it had been erased. Some Marines loved it. Some called it a suicide machine that would overheat and get its gunner killed. Tony didn't argue. He just said, "I'll carry one." 6 Stingers were built. 5 went to G Company. 1 went to Corporal Tony Stein of a company, the only man outside G Company trusted with the new gun. 3. The Black Sand. February 19, 1945. Iwo Jima. American planners believed the island could be taken in a matter of days. They were wrong. Under that black volcanic sand was a honeycomb of tunnels, bunkers, and pillboxes dug by more than 20,000 Japanese defenders. Their commander, General Kuribayashi, had ordered them not to die in banzai charges but to stay underground and make every yard of the island a killing zone. Wikipedia. +1. Tony's unit, Company A, 1st Battalion, 28th Marines, hit the beach in the first wave. The moment they stepped off the landing craft, they were hit with accurate machine gun fire from hidden positions, mortars walking across the sand, and artillery zeroed on the landing zones. Men were being cut down before they even found cover. Standard Marine machine guns, the M1919s, could put out decent fire, but they were heavy and slow to move. Setting them up in that deep, soft volcanic ash took time, and time got people killed. Tony had no intention of staying pinned on the shoreline. He flattened himself in the sand, watched the tracers, and realized something: his platoon could not see where most of this fire was coming from. The Japanese had camouflaged their pillboxes almost perfectly. So he did something insane and mathematically logical at the same time. He stood up. 4. Drawing fire. Tony rose into full view with the stinger at his shoulder and started looking for muzzle flashes. The defenders noticed immediately. Every gun within sight line tried to kill the lone Marine who had just stood up in the middle of the killing ground. But that was exactly what Tony wanted. When the enemy fired at him, they gave away their positions. He spotted the first pillbox, a small slit, rocks piled just right, a hint of barrel in the shadow. Tony pressed the trigger. The stinger didn't chatter like a normal gun. It screamed. In a few heartbeats, 100 rounds were out of the barrel, tearing into sandbags and concrete, punching into the firing slit, showering the inside with fragments and lead. The pillbox went quiet. He swung to a second position. Another short burst. Another enemy gun went silent. All across the line, Marines realized something. When that crazy homemade gun started talking, the Japanese defenses stopped talking back. They got up and moved. Tony advanced, clearing the ruined positions with grenades and short bursts. Inside, there were dead gunners, wrecked weapons, and shattered concrete. Then his belt went dry. In under 10 seconds of continuous fire, 100 rounds were gone. The Stinger's biggest strength was also its biggest weakness. Tony had turned himself into a one-man machine gun section, but he was burning ammo faster than anyone else on the island. There was only one way to fix that. Run to the beach. In the open. Through the same fire they had just escaped. 5. The barefoot runs. Tony sprinted back toward the waterline to the ammo dump, the stinger in his hands. On the way, he found a wounded Marine lying in the sand, unable to move. Tony picked him up, slung him over his shoulder, and kept going. One trip for ammo became one trip for ammo and a wounded man. He would repeat that pattern again. And again. And again. Every time his ammo ran low, Tony sprinted 200 yards back across soft volcanic ash. Grabbed a wounded Marine and carried him to the rear. Picked up more belts of .30-06. And then ran back into the fight with the Stinger. By the time the day was over, he had made 8 of these runs, each under fire, each time bringing a wounded Marine with him. At some point the volcanic ash literally chewed his boots apart. They filled with grit, the soles ripped, and every step got slower and more painful. So Tony did something no one expected. He took his boots off. He kicked them away, stripped off his helmet to save a bit more weight, and started doing the same run barefoot, in sharp, glass-like volcanic grit, because a few seconds saved on each trip might mean one more man living long enough to reach a corpseman. Other Marines saw this and gave him a nickname that would stick. The Barefoot Gunner or the Barefoot Corporal. Tony just kept moving. For him it was simple math. If he moved faster, more Marines lived. 6. They shot the gun out of his hands. As the day went on, the Stinger took a beating. The barrel began to glow and discolor from heat. The wooden stock started to char. The improvised trigger mechanism stuck now and then. At one point, an enemy round hit the gun and literally knocked it out of Tony's hands. He scrambled back out into the open to grab it while machine gun bullets chewed into the ground around him. He cleared the jam with his fingers, loaded another belt, and went right back to firing. By late afternoon, Tony's platoon had pushed hundreds of yards inland, knocking out one position after another. The official Medal of Honor citation would later credit him with killing at least 20 enemy soldiers and neutralizing a string of pillboxes almost single-handedly that day. But ask the men around him, and many would say his most important work wasn't what he destroyed. It was who he carried. 8 trips. 8 wounded Marines who would almost certainly have died on the beach if Tony hadn't thrown them over his shoulder and run. By nightfall, the Stinger was barely holding together, and Tony was cut up, exhausted, and bleeding from small wounds and torn feet. But Company A was off the beach and dug in near the base of Mount Suribachi. For one brutal day, an improvised aircraft gun and a barefoot machinist had been the spearhead. 7. Up the mountain. The fight for Iwo Jima didn't end at the waterline. In the days that followed, the 28th Marines fought their way up the slopes of Mount Suribachi, the volcanic peak that dominated the southern end of the island. Japanese troops had turned the mountain into a fortress of caves, tunnels, and hidden gun positions. Tony kept carrying the Stinger, even as armorers tried to coax a bit more life out of the battered weapon. They replaced what they could, but the gun would never be quite the same. During the push up Suribachi, Tony was wounded by grenade fragments. He kept fighting until corpsmen insisted he be evacuated. Eventually he was pulled back to a hospital ship offshore. For most people, that would have been the end of the story. He'd already done more than enough. He'd earned a ticket home. Tony didn't see it that way. 8. Walking back into hell. While Tony lay in a bunk on the hospital ship, the rest of his division kept fighting, pushing north toward a brutal objective known as Hill 362A. The casualties mounted. Company A, Tony's company, was being ripped apart. When Tony heard how bad it was, he made a decision that would have gotten him in trouble in peacetime. He left the hospital ship. Bandaged, still wounded, he climbed into a landing craft heading back to Iwo Jima. He picked up new boots and a standard M1 Garand rifle from the supply dumps on the beach and walked 6 miles up the island through wrecked tanks, shell craters, and rows of graves until he found what was left of Company A. They were down to a fraction of their original strength. There was no spare manpower. No rest. The Stinger was gone by then, either destroyed, lost, or in someone else's hands. Tony didn't ask for it. He just took his place back in the line as another rifleman. For the next few days he fought in close-quarters combat among the rocks and ravines of Hill 362A, where Japanese defenders used caves and spider holes to launch sudden, deadly attacks. 9. The Last Patrol. On March 1, 1945, a small patrol from Company A was ordered forward. 19 men, including Corporal Tony Stein as assistant patrol leader. Their task sounded simple: move out, locate a network of enemy positions that had been hammering the company, and bring back information so the main force could attack effectively. It wasn't an assault mission. On paper, their job was to look, not to fight. The terrain in front of them was perfect ambush country, jagged volcanic ridges, folds in the ground, and more of those deadly spider holes Japanese soldiers used as hideouts. The patrol advanced carefully, stop and go, scanning for movement. Tony, as usual, moved toward the front to get a clearer view ahead. At some point, someone across that shattered landscape saw a helmet, the brief outline of a man, the slightest movement. A single sniper shot cracked across the valley. The bullet struck Tony in the head. He dropped where he stood. The corpsman with the patrol reached him within seconds, but there was nothing anyone could do. At age 23, the machinist from Dayton, the barefoot gunner of Iwo Jima, was gone. The patrol completed its mission, located the positions, and brought back the information. The battle for Hill 362A would drag on. Iwo Jima would not be declared secured until the end of March. Tony Stein never saw that day. 10. What came after? Tony was first buried on Iwo Jima in the 5th Division Cemetery. After the war, his remains were brought home to Dayton, Ohio, where he was reinterred at Calvary Cemetery with full military honors. He is still the only World War II Medal of Honor recipient from that city. On February 19, 1946, exactly 1 year after his actions on the beach, Tony's widow Joan received his Medal of Honor from Ohio's governor. The citation talked about him being the first from his unit to reach his firing position, repeatedly exposing himself to draw fire and locate enemy guns, storming pillboxes one after another, and making 8 trips back to the beach, each time carrying a wounded Marine and returning with ammunition. The citation mentions a personally improvised aircraft-type weapon. It doesn't say the name the Marines gave it. But we know it, the Stinger. Only 6 Stingers were ever made. They were just field modifications, not officially adopted. After the war, they vanished, destroyed, scrapped, or lost in the churn of demobilization. Today, only replicas exist in museums and in documentaries, rebuilt from photos and surviving parts by people who were fascinated that a couple of Marines had turned aircraft guns into some of the fastest-firing weapons on Iwo Jima. What didn't vanish was the story of a machinist who looked at a problem and built his own solution. Of a Marine who decided that saving minutes, even seconds, was worth shredded feet and more time under fire. Of a young man who left a hospital ship, already wounded, because his unit needed people on the line. Improvisation. Adaptation. Refusing to quit on the people to your left and right. That's the legacy of Tony Stein. If this story hit you, don't let it stop here. Like this video so the algorithm doesn't bury it. Subscribe to War Era Records for more real stories from the front lines of history, not just statistics, but the human beings behind them. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, and whether anyone in your family served in World War II or any other conflict. You're not just an audience. You're part of keeping these memories alive. This is War Era Records, and we'll see you in the next chapter of history.